kiss for you.
Alright, so we're going to look at how to fix a slow computer. If you just want the rundown real quick, here are the 11 steps that I generally speaking recommend. You can pause it, read it up, download all the programs you want to. If you're confused on anything or you want, extra help, that's what the rest of the video is going to be for. But generally speaking, I think these are pretty self-explanatory. And yeah, so we'll get started. The first one is running malwarebytes. So obviously, if you have a slow computer, the first thing you're going to want to do is run a program to check to see if it's a virus or not. I recommend malwarebytes because it's free, it doesn't pest you for a bunch of things, and it works very well. So this is their new UI that you have here. You go to dashboard and you do scanner. I, for instance, go to settings here under scan detection and make sure the scan for rootkits is enabled, because if a virus or something gets into that deep of a system, you're going to want to be able to know that that's what it is. Obviously, make sure scan within archives is on, and use AI to detect threats is also on. Prioritizing scans, all this stuff I believe is also pretty standard. So you do this, you hit scan, and it'll start scanning your system. It'll look like this, right? It's going to go through threats and rootkits and memory and startup items, and then it'll do the file system, right? And as you can see, it's going to scan the items, and it will do detections. I'm going to cancel this because it usually takes somewhere from like 5 to 15 minutes, which is a little bit long for the demo I'm doing here. And you'll say scan complete, and it will have a little report here basically showing the threats and all that. And what you can do afterwards is if you go to advanced scan, I believe, right here, you can configure a scan and do a little bit more in depth. So if you know about this or are aware about this kind of stuff, you can decide, okay, I want to detect things like unwanted programs or unwanted modifications, and I want to ignore them because maybe I'm running something and it's like, sometimes there's false positives, and so you might want to run something and it keeps popping up as a virus and it's not a virus, and so you can go in here and kind of configure that stuff. But generally speaking, for people that don't know what that is, you can just go scan and it'll be good, right? And you can obviously go to your detection history and see all your devices and kind of what's in there. One thing that you do not want to get kind of bamboozled by is this number here. In this case, my protection score is 90, which is good because I just theoretically ran a scan. This protection score basically just means, have you ran a scan recently, and typically speaking, do you have the real-time protection? This score will frequently be low because you don't run a scan all the time, and you won't have real-time protection if you're not paying for it, right? So don't worry about this. Is not too much of a problem. In this case, I theoretically did a scan and it went up from 50 to 90, right? So it's not a thing you need to be concerned about, but definitely just checking out if it's scanning and see if it's a virus or not. It will tell you, you can quarantine it and all that, and you'll be good to go. The next thing, if you scan for a virus and it turns out, oh look, it's not a problem, then the next thing you're going to want to do when your computer is still slow is check for extra files. Now, ccleaner is the program I recommend to do this. I also recommend WizTree. I think WizTree is a little bit easier to use because it's a little bit of a different thing, but ultimately what ccleaner is going to do, and the free version is similar to malwarebytes, except it's going to check for extra files. I did a scan here, and in my case, it only found browsing history and temp internet files, which didn't take up a ton of space, so I'm not going to clear them. But if I did, I can just hit the clear button here, and it will clear them. Other things that this can do, if you decide to pay for it, which is I think like $2 a month, you can do performance scanning, which will just optimize your programs and put programs you don't use to sleep. Updating drivers, so if you have any drivers or anything like that for your graphics card or for your monitor or any peripheral devices like mice or headphones you have, you can update the drivers pretty easily through that, as well as various software and stuff as well. You obviously don't need this. This isn't an endorsement or anything, but generally speaking, I think the health check here is useful if you do have a bunch of items, temp items, and you've never done this before. Then you might have a good amount of temp items that are causing issues. So make sure to check that for ccleaner right there. Other than those two things, the next thing we're going to be going on to is checking disk. So your disk or your hard drive, whatever it is, these things here, are pretty important because obviously, the health of these are dependent on how well your system is going to be running. Most things on your system are going to be running through these drives, and if these drives are not healthy, you're not going to have a very good time. So the thing I recommend doing for that is going to the command window, which you can just type in command, cmd, right click, run as admin, which will run a prompt here as admin. I will just get rid of this one because I already have one up. And I will go and do check disk /f, which will let me check the disk and determine if there's any issues with it. So I'll just paste that in here. And right, can't run this one currently. This is kind of a thing you need to know. Depending on whatever your default drive is. So for example, my Windows drive here is an SSD. It's built-in NVMe, all that stuff. If you're confused about any of these terms, you can check my computer basics guide. It explains all that. But that kind of drive does not, like the check disk won't work the first time around. It will check the disk, but you have to basically lock it first, as it explains here, and it won't do that until the next time you restart the system. So like you can do this and it will pop this up saying, hey, it can't lock it, but if you would like to schedule the volume to be checked the next time you restart the system, you can do that, right? So you can just do yes or no. If you want to check a disk and it's an NVMe or an SSD, you can definitely do this, and next time you restart and turn back on, it might take a little longer, but it will go through this whole thing. If it's a hard drive, I don't believe that's the case because it is related to this specific NTFS format here that's causing the issue, the reason it can't check. The good news is that even if you don't go through that process, there's another way to check. You can right-click on your drive in this PC, go to Properties, go to Tools, Error Checking, and hit Check. And this will scan the drive and check it for errors. So this doesn't need to lock the system. It doesn't need to do anything like that. It'll check, and this basically checks for errors in where it finds stuff. Because a lot of the time, what might happen is you open a program, and let's say it takes longer than you expect it to run. That's because the SSD is trying to find the bits to create that program and find it, and it doesn't find anything, right? Or it's having trouble. It like basically loops on itself. And this will check to make sure, hey, is it looping on itself? And in this case, mine isn't. No errors are found. If it does find errors, then it does tend to fix them. But overall, that's a very nice check to see, hey, is the SSD, is the thing my computer's running off of a problem? And that you do that either through the check disk one, which is a little bit more thorough, or you can go through the error checking one that I just showed there. Now, if those three things, these are mostly sequential. So like you do malwarebytes, if that fixes the problem, great. You do ccleaner, if that fixes the problem, great. You check your disk for errors. If it finds something and it repairs it, great. If it doesn't, or if there's like no problem, then you're going to go on to step 4, which is to repair corrupted files. Now, again, we're going to go to command window, run as admin, repair corrupted files by the classic sfc /scan_now. That will repair corrupted files. I'll enter there, and that will run through the system and begin scanning. Now, this takes a little bit, but usually, obviously depending on your system and the specs and stuff, but generally this is just going to scan the entire system and check if any corrupted files. A lot of the time, you might have corrupted files and you don't know it. I've ran this a couple times and have been surprised that it repairs some files I didn't know about. But overall, I think this is a good thing, generally speaking, to go through. We'll just let that go on in the background because it does take a second. But usually this can be caused from like a Windows update. So if there's a recent Windows update and it like breaks some things or makes some programs crash, you should run the sfc scan now, and it will repair those files. So it works pretty well. The other thing to do, and this is kind of related to like the temp apps and the like extra storage and kind of the fluff and stuff, is disabling startup apps, which limits the impact. So a large part of why slowdown, or it feels like stuff slows down, is because the computer takes a long time to boot, right? You're restarting, you go into it, right? And all of a sudden, it's taking like 10, 15 minutes or something for all the icons to show up on the screen, all the, things to work. And part of that could be, the virus or the extra files and stuff, but it could also be the fact that you have a lot of apps that run at startup. You fix that, right-click on the bottom bar here, Task Manager, go to Startup Apps. These will tell you all the apps that you have that are starting up and their startup impact. As you can see, a lot of my apps that I have startup here are not measured, but a lot of them are measured. Things that high impact of startup, Steam tends to have a high impact of startup, things like Skype, Microsoft Teams, Xbox, Discord, things related to whatever your OEM is. So in case mine has Lenovo, so my Lenovo startup things tend to be pretty big. Spotify could be one if it's trying to load a bunch of songs and things. So ccleaner says enabled. I'm going to right click and disable it, and that way I don't have it running automatically when everything boots up, right? And most of these end up being disabled because I don't need them, but overall anything that has to be an app that has to load up can definitely slow down your system. So just make sure that if you open your computer and all of a sudden there's 20 different apps that start opening up, maybe go into here and disable some of them, and that might improve your speed problem. The next thing, these are all mostly tips related to your hard drive and your SSD, because majority of the time when things are slow, it is the fact that your hard drive is either in poor health or something with an error that it has, or there's a corrupted file somewhere, or maybe a virus. Most of the time, things like your CPU and your RAM and your GPU and your power supply and stuff are not going to affect your health of the computer and how quickly it's running. It is possible, right, if it is old enough or has a defect or something, but most of the time you're going to be dealing with your hard drive. which is why the next program that I recommend installing is Crystaldiskinfo, which I have right here. This program, which I can't increase the size of, scans your drives and tells you how many cycles there are and all that stuff. You're basically just looking for this good. What's the percent lifespan that's left? In this case, my SanDisk, which is a external SSD I've had for the longest amount of time, is at 97%. And as you can see from the power on hours, it's been 4 years, 20 days, and 8 hours I've had that device, and that's the power on hours compared to these other ones, which is 13 days or 3 days in terms of like power to on, right? Now that is not obviously indicative of much, but it is indicative that this one that has the longest amount of time used is also the lowest in terms of percentages here. This health status is just determining, hey, is it checking all these things and is it figuring out that all these are good? Is it all working correctly? And the answer is yes. It can also show your temperature to make sure that things aren't going, crazy. And you can kind of see that by, what the temperature is. As you can see, this 35C one for the SanDisk is higher. So that could potentially, if it gets up higher, in this case, it's not too warm, right? But overall, if you see that, spiking all of a sudden, if you have this open and you see the percent going down or something, that could indicate, hey, maybe there's a problem with this device. Maybe it's not, doing what it should. And then you'll see stuff in disk mark change. You don't have to worry about this too much, but it's definitely good to occasionally just check it out and say, hey, how are these devices doing? Because obviously if there's a problem, then it can show up here, and it would show up red here if there was a problem with any of these checks. The last couple of things here relate to replacing your hard drive. I would recommend this if either you can get a technician to do it or you think you have someone that's more tech savvy that can help you do this. But ultimately, what you're going to try and do is go to the manufacturer website or call support to see if an OEM part, which is the original manufacturer part, is purchasable, and if they can replace it or if you can replace it. You're basically just trying to see from this one if you can get an original part. So for example, if you have a Lenovo laptop, they a lot of the time have Lenovo ThinkPad batteries. And so you can usually just buy this typically from Lenovo or other sites or eBay, right, for pretty cheap. And you'll be able to basically plop that back into your laptop relatively easily. You can a lot of the time find these replacement drives, right, as you can see here, and basically just pop it back into the laptop and you'll be all good. A lot of the time, the actual site manufacturers will have guides on how to do that. I am somehow on Google Shopping. A lot of the time, the manufacturers will have guides on how to do that, right, like how to replace hard drives in a laptop, like right here, right, from PC Monkey. So a lot of these videos will, as long as you get the right one, tell you how to replace a battery and replace a hard drive. The reason battery is important is because like the slowness could be on the fact that you have a bad battery, and a bad battery obviously is not good in a laptop, and that could affect the ability of other components to do their job because ultimately the power supply is pretty wonky. If your power supply is wonky, you're gonna potentially be crashing, be unstable. It could slow things down. So definitely try and find out if the OEM you have, the manufacturer website, has a part, either a battery or a hard drive, that's replaceable, and if they can or you can replace it. If it is replaceable, as I said before, look up a guide for your laptop or desktop brand. A new SSD will definitely improve the device, right? If you can get like a SATA or more preferably an NVMe drive, and your laptop supports that, then being able to swap that out is incredibly useful and will make your device feel newer regardless of anything else. If it's not replaceable, however, I would still recommend getting an external SSD and using it to reinstall frequently used programs. So for example, a lot of the time when I was noticing that things were pretty slow, I had stuff like my Explorer and I had like my Paint applications and other things like Spotify and stuff. I had them running off of my hard drive. Now, even though an external hard drive cannot be used as a boot drive, meaning you can't have your entire OS on an external drive, at least in Windows, you can reinstall, so uninstall, right, via the uninstall remove programs section here. So you can uninstall programs and then reinstall them to that SSD, and a lot of the time they'll just run quicker. Now, SATA isn't the best in terms of speed, but it will definitely be better than a hard drive, and especially be better than like a failing hard drive, right? So if it's not replaceable, definitely get an external SSD and use it to reinstall frequently used programs. It will lead to quicker loading time if the app's loading is a problem. Like if you notice, if primarily your concern for a slow PC is like, oh, I open up File Explorer and it takes a while. That isn't going to be solved by this because that's like an OS level thing. But other apps like Chrome, like Firefox, like other, Steam or Spotify or anything else, right? All that's a factor of the apps installed, and if you install that to an external SSD, it'll be much quicker. The other thing that I recently had learned is if you have an old monitor and this was a really weird bug that I had. If you have an old monitor, so the one that I found was like a ViewSonic monitor, right? Like an old one of these, and it's connected through something like a VGA cable, one of these big ones, right? These kind of things. If it's connected through this, or it's connected through an old HDMI cable or something like that, it could be the cable connection. Because what I experienced was a very weird thing where a person had a slow computer. I would turn it on, everything seemed fine. I did all the checks like we ran through here, and it turned out that the cable connection would freeze on whatever the last input it found was, and would only reopen when you like turned off and on again like a bunch of times. And it was the cable. It was the fact that this cable was defective. And so I had to take it, replace it with an HDMI cable, and it fixed the problem. All of a sudden, instead of freezing on the last frame and not working, it would just work. It would respond. There were some funky things still with the monitor, but overall, it was much better than the previous solution. So if you notice that, for example, in his case, when he shut the computer down and turned it back on, that the screen like froze and it wouldn't work and it just wasn't responding, that could be a cable issue. So you want to make sure that if your PC, check the connection quality. It can sometimes be the monitor bugging out, the cable being spotty. In that case, just replace the cable and you should be fine. If your monitor has multiple inputs in the back, like multiple HDMI or VGA ports, then try those. But ultimately, it could be a connection problem between that. This is definitely pretty rare, but it is something I did end up having to go through, and I just want to make people aware of that. That is definitely a possibility, that if none of these steps work and your computer's still slow, and you've done things like, if you can't replace it, you've moved all your stuff over to an external SSD, then it's definitely possible that it could be a connection problem. The other thing you can do, and the last tip I have here, is that if you have a system that is pretty old, that maybe isn't supported anymore, maybe it's running like Windows 8 that's not supported anymore, something like that, you can improve the feeling of the system and still give life to it by installing Linux. And the Linux ISO I'd recommend is Mint. And that's pretty easy. All you have to do is type in Windows 8 install Linux Mint, right? Pretty simple, and you'll get a whole bunch of answers on how to install Mint. I recommend Mint mainly because it's pretty easy in terms of use and all that. So if you want, and it's lightweight, right? So like if you have a Windows 8 machine and it's running very slow and these other things aren't fixing it, it is a potential that you can install a different operating system on it, like Linux Mint, and it will run better. So hopefully these helped. Hopefully those made sense, but definitely try and go through these steps and see what works and see what doesn't and all that. And overall, just try everything you can, and if it still doesn't work and it's still slow, then I would recommend trying to install Linux on it. And a lot of the time what that'll do is get rid of all the bloat and all that stuff that tends to come with a lot of Windows systems, right? Especially Windows 8 had a lot of bloat on it. And so if you can get rid of that, a lot of the time your system will run better. But yeah, overall, that's what I would recommend. If you can, obviously get a replacement from a hard drive to an SSD. That's like the best thing you can do in terms of making your device feel better, because it will just run snappier. But yeah, overall, these are all steps to try and fix your computer. A lot of them you can do, without having to go to a shop, without having to pay anyone. All these programs I mentioned here are free, so definitely just check that out. If you have any suggestions in the comments about what you've done and maybe it worked and I haven't mentioned it here, then make sure definitely leave that information below, and I'll try and respond and boost any comments or whatever and pin stuff that I find interesting. So yeah, I'll see everyone in the next video.